Welcome everybody to the final review of Dominaria United for Limited, specifically draft, not sealed. Sealed's a little different. I haven't really been thinking about sealed here. Today we're doing white and lands, and we have some interesting stuff, but before we go over it, I want to mention that we have blue-black, red-green, and colorless and multicolor in 3 different videos that you can find in the description. Also, in all of those videos I go over my rating scale, which is right here on the screen. We're going to go over it again in this video. There should be a time code inside the description that you can use to skip to the cards if you've already seen the rating scale. But we're going to go over it now just in case. We have 5 different main tiers here. The first is the worst cards in the format. These are, well, the worst cards and sideboard cards. They obviously don't go with the rest of the cards because they just don't belong. 1, design mistakes, never play them, somebody messed up, they're just completely unplayable and don't do anything. Very few cards end up over here. Wizard's design is usually pretty good. Sideboard /Y is for 2. And these are cards that either you're not playing in your main deck and you shouldn't be playing them ever in your main deck, or cards that just aren't in supported archetypes, or support archetypes that just don't exist. Surprisingly, a good number of cards fit inside this category. You have cards like Naturalize, stuff like that. 3, 4, and 5 are the most common cards you're going to have. These are filler. Bad filler, the lowest tier of playable. Very disappointed when you have to play these. Filler, these are cards that are your 17th to 23rd card. They're completely replacement level. And then good, these are versatile and strong, and often they're going to just be better than the regular filler on their own merits. Sometimes the stat blocks are just higher, sometimes they have a good amount of upside, but they're just always going to be better than 4s and 3s. 6s and 7s are some of the best cards in the format. They're high tier playables, signals that a color or combo is open, high power and toughness compared to mana cost, high upside, high floors, incredibly high ceilings. Removal spells tend to be 6s, unless they're undercosted or hyper efficient. However, removal spells that are a little restrictive or expensive tend to fall back down to 5. 7s are first picks. They're archetype defining, and cards that just blow everything else out of the water in terms of power and upside. 8 and 9, these are the mythic uncommons. Absolutely format warping stuff. Things that either don't belong at uncommon or lower, that have a power equivalent to a rare, or that are just obviously better than literally every other card. Cards that make your opponent sigh. And then 10 is unbeatable. This card is also not going to happen at uncommon or lower these days. Wizard's design as it is, this just does not happen, thank God. They've learned some of their lessons from past limited formats with a couple of the uncommons. I think there was one in particular in Dominaria the first. I think it was that Dominaria? I don't remember, but there was a card that you kicked it and it made a Drake. And whenever you kicked another spell, it made another Drake. And that was by far the most powerful thing you could do in the format, and it outclassed most rares. So it was an unbeatable card unless you had specifically like a perfect aggro start or exactly enchantment removal. So with that out of the way, we're going to start with white, then we're going to move on to lands, and then we'll be finished with our set review, and I'm going to talk a little bit about the archetypes and where I think they stand as far as power rankings. Starting with Argivian Cavalier, which is 2 and a white for a 2/2 with enlist, and when it enters the battlefield it makes a 1/1 white soldier creature token. I like this card a lot. I think that this is a 5. Generally, you're going to be paying 3 mana for a 3/2 in this format most of the time, and this leaves you something that can both block a 3/2 and trade off, and also leaves you a 1/1 white soldier behind. And in the white deck specifically, you're looking to play a lot of creatures and have expendable bodies. Like black-white, you want the expendable bodies to sacrifice, and in green-white, you want the extra bodies because you benefit from pump spells and stuff like that. Speaking of, we have the next card, Argivian Phalanx, which is 5 and a white for a 4/4 with Vigilance, and it costs 1 less to cast for each creature you control. So we just came off of a card that is a really good common for 3 mana that gives you 2 creatures, and it curves directly into this. Like, this is like a 5.5 bordering on a 6. This card's really, really easy to make good, and a 4/4 Vigilance is no joke. Like, even if you only have one other creature out, a 5 mana 4/4 Vigilance, that's like what you get these days. This is pretty far above par. So this is at least a 5, and it's looking more and more towards 6 the more cards like Argivian Cavalier I see. Artillery Blast is next, and this is where we start to see like a sharp decline in the power level from the last 2 cards. It's 1 and a white for an instant with Domain. It deals X damage to target tapped creature, where X is 1 plus a number of basic land types among lands you control. Well, first things first, you need to have creatures that are tapped in order to use it, because you can't just, be the beat down and expect this card to ever do anything, really. Also, you have to question how many land types you need before this card even becomes remotely playable. So we know from sets past that generally you're going to be paying 2 or 3 mana to get 4 damage. So I think if you only have 2 basic land types and you're dealing 3 to something, this card is like a 3 or a 4. If you're consistently dealing 4 or 5 or even 6, I think that this card gets a good amount better. Maybe like a 5, but I don't think this card is a 6. It's just too situational. I think you'll know when you want it, and when you want it, you're going to be happy with it if it can deal 4, and you're going to be a little unhappy with it if it can only ever deal 3. Banalish Faithbonder is 1 and a white for a 1/3 with Vigilance and Enlist. Enlist, as we've noted before, is good with creatures with higher toughness than power, because all that added power means that you're getting a bit of an undercosted beater most of the time. But this is just okay. I think this is a fine 2. I think later in the game it can't just it does demand an actual block from a real creature, but I don't know if it reaches up into 5 territory. I guess it does by definition. So I'll give it a 5, although I'm not super duper excited about it. Now we have Banalish Sleeper, which is 1 and a white for a 3/1 with kicker for black, and if it was kicked, each player sacrifices a creature when it enters the battlefield. I like this card a lot. There's a lot of things you can sacrifice that are going to be below replacement level, literally tokens, and your opponent isn't always going to have tokens. So this is a pretty good black-white hybrid card. I don't think I really ever want to cast this outside of black-white, because just a vanilla 3/1 for 2 mana that's like a 4 out of 10. If you always got the sacrifice effect out of it, and you have the right deck for it, I think that raises up to a 5 out of 10, pretty easy. Captain's Call, 3 and a white for a sorcery, create 3 1/1 white soldier creature tokens. I gotta say, I really, really, really prefer Call the Cavalry. I think I loved that card a lot. It was the same mana cost, same sorcery speed, but you made 2 2/2s with Vigilance. 3 1/1 white soldier creature tokens it's good for the green-white deck specifically, and I guess it's good for black-white for things to sacrifice, but like, so medium as far as power and toughness. Maybe the other card was just so overtuned that I'm having tunnel vision, but I can't help but feel like this card is just replacement level in most decks, and in the decks where it's good, it'll be like a 4.5. Charismatic Vanguard is a 3 mana 3/2, 2 and a white, with an ability, 4 and a white, creatures you control get +1/+1 until end of turn. This is kind of the payoff for all of your creatures, like just spending a lot of mana, making a whole lot of them. It's good. I'd say this is a a 4.5. It's not incredible, but it's not 100% replacement level either. That activated ability is definitely enough to where you're going to be happy sometimes. Maybe it is just a 4, maybe it just doesn't quite do enough. Yeah, I think 4 is fine. Citizen's Arrest is next. 1 white for an enchantment. When it enters the battlefield, exile target creature or planeswalker an opponent controls until it leaves the battlefield. I like this card a lot, and I think it's a 6 straight away. Mostly because pacifism effects, things that just make things unable to attack or block, are much worse than a set like this one, where some of the biggest, bombiest uncommons and rares have effects when they just sit and play. Of course, this card does lose something, in that there's also a lot of kicker in the set, and a lot of the value from your opponent's cards is going to be off of when they first get cast, and not necessarily from them just sitting there. But I still think it's good. I mean, it's going to get rid of a creature, and unless they have enchantment removal, it's probably going to stay gone forever. Next is Clockwork Drawbridge, which is 1 white mana for a 0/3. I like that this is actually a 0/3 instead of a 0/2 because it can actually block, and you can spend 2 and a white and tap it to tap target creature. That is a pretty hefty cost, but I don't think it is an unplayable cost. I think this card is a 4. I don't think it's really good enough to necessitate a 5 at all, but I think it is above like the lowest level replacement, specifically because of the ability it has. Destroy Evil is 1 and a white for an instant. Destroy target creature with toughness 4 or greater, or destroy target enchantment. So there's always a danger when you play cards like this that they just don't have a target. And if you ever play against an aggro deck where you just can't use it, it feels miserable. I've done it before. It's a mistake you only need to learn once. It's a lesson that you learn quickly and never again. So I think it deserves a sideboard grade. If you main deck it, it'll be okay if they have targets, but when you don't, it's going to feel so bad. And for that reason, in most decks, if you're main decking it, I would call it a replacement level card 4, or even a 3. Griffin Projector is next. Looking at a 3 and a white 2/3, whenever another creature enters the battlefield under your control, it gets +1/+1 until end of turn. The fact that it's a 2/3 makes me like it a little bit more. Problem is, it is necessarily a card that is better on offense than defense, and you're definitely not guaranteed to be the beatdown 100% of the time. I think this is a replacement level card in most decks, and if you're the super duper heavy beatdown, it can reach like almost a 5. Heroic Charge is next. 2 and 2 white for an instant. Creatures you control get +2/+1 until end of turn, and for an additional 1 and a red, which is 6 mana total, you can give those creatures trample until end of turn. I think that's just okay. If you're giving your creatures +2/+1 until end of turn, if you're not winning combat already, it's not like the trample's going to do that much more for you. Like, if your creatures were already big enough to where they were going to live, well then, good. You're winning combat and you're wiping out all your opponent's blockers more than likely, in which case next turn you'll probably win the game. This kicker ability just feels like a tack on. I don't really think it's that good. This card in general, I think if you're playing green-white or red-white, it will function sometimes as a 5, but it'll also function as a 3 sometimes, which means that kind of high variance card I can only ever give a 4. One of the other problems is that this competes as far as your deck slots with creatures and removal spells, because this is neither of those. And honestly, we've already seen like 2 or 3 different cards that just give you pump for free on creatures that you already want to play. So stuff like this just falls out of favor for me really quickly. Juniper Order Root Reaver is a 1 and a white 2/2, and when it enters the battlefield, if it's kicked, you put a 1/1 counter on target creature you control. I like this card a lot. I think this card is close to a 5. It might just be a 5, The fact that in the early game you just get your 2/2 for 2, and in the late game you can make it a 3/3 if you don't have a better creature to put it on, and if you do have a better creature to put it on, like something with an evasion ability, or something with a just a big creature that can't block very well, and make it better, makes it a good top deck in the late game when ordinarily a card like this would not be. I think I'm comfortable giving it a 5. It's definitely above par and above replacement. Mesa Cavalier is a 2 and a white 2/1 with flying, and when it enters the battlefield you gain 2 life. Yeah, I think this is a fine enough card. It doesn't draw a card, it doesn't give anything else flying, but it does beat at least. Yeah, I think it's like a 4.3, 4.5-ish, something like that. I'm not super duper impressed with it. I guess if you're the beatdown, it's pretty solid. Helps you maintain your aggression in the air while also keeping your life total a little bit padded. So yeah, I could see if you're like the aggressive red-white deck, it's pretty okay and would be a 5. Samoite Herbalist is next, which is 1 and a white for a 2/1. And whenever it becomes tapped, you gain 1 life and scry 1. Okay, so they're telling you to tap it, which means a few different things. You can attack with it, or you can use it to enlist. And I think enlist is where it's really going to shine here. I like this card a lot for that reason, and I kind of want to immediately give it a 5. But the fact that it has 1 toughness, and it needs enlist to actually do that stuff, makes me think that it's more of a 4. Especially since if you're attacking with it, it trades with literally anything. So I'm thinking like a 4.3. Stall for time. 2 and a white for an instant. Tap up to 2 target creatures. If it was kicked, you put a stun counter on each of those creatures. Draw a card. This card is very, very powerful. The kicker cost is 2 mana. You don't even need the kicker cost for this to be a good card. The fact that it is an instant that says tap 2 creatures, draw a card for 3 mana is plenty enough. The kicker is just icing on the cake. If you're in blue-white, this card's going to be like a 5 bordering on a 6 sometimes. And if you're not in blue-white and just in white, this is still going to be like a 5 a good amount of the time, because you're getting your card back and either removing 2 blockers or stopping 2 creatures from attacking you for a whole turn. And that's really good. Take up the shield, which is 1 and a white for a instant that says put a 1/1 counter on target creature. It gains lifelink and indestructible until end of turn. Lifelink and indestructible is a pretty good set of stats, well, a pretty good pair of abilities. And the +1/+1 counter means it's likely to actually win the combat that it was in, if things are closely contested. Trade for something it otherwise wouldn't be able to trade for. So I think this is definitely an above replacement level combat trick, but still being a combat trick, I think it does not deserve too high above a 4, and for that reason I'm just going to give it a 4. If you're in the market for a combat trick, you can do worse than this, but you can't really do too much better. Leaving Skyrider is 2 and a white for a 2/2 flash flying creature. And ooh, wow, what an interesting ability. It has kicker for 2 and a red, and when it enters the battlefield, if it was kicked, which would be 6 mana, but it does have flash, it deals X damage to any target where X is the number of attacking creatures. Notably, it does not say creatures you control, so you can actually play this on your opponent's turn if they attack with 2 things. Kill a 2/2 and block the other 2/2, and 2 for 1. Pretty easy, with only 6 mana. I think this card's really good. I want to start it at a 6. It's good in the beatdown deck. It's good if you're on the back foot. It's just a fine card overall, and I'm happy giving it a 6. Coalition Sky Knight is next. Flying and Enlist, it's a 4 mana 2/2. Enlist is pretty good on flying creatures. That's one of the ones we haven't seen yet. And I'm happy to say that I like this card a lot. So one of the weaknesses of tutus with flying for 4 is that they don't really attack into any reach creatures especially well. This shores up that weakness at least, so it's at least better than that. But the problem is, on the defense, it's just really, really bad. Like, the nightmare scenario is you're in a deck and your draw is even slightly clunky, and then your turn 4 play is this, and your opponent's like, oh, nice 4 mana 2/2, I'm going to attack you and then play out a 4/4. Nice, 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 good job. Anyway, please die now. And then you're gonna die. Pretty easy. Whew. Yeah, I think I'll give this a 4. I think it is replacement level, unfortunately. If you're in the aggro deck and you're always going to be beating down, it's going to perform better than that. But I think for the most part it is a 4. Join forces, 2 and a white for an instant. Untap up to 2 target creatures. They each get +2/+2 until end of turn. This card's a beating. It is a 5, bordering on a 6, as long as you have creatures in your deck to cast it on. Pretty easy to blow out an attack step with this. And if you are playing against a white deck and they leave open 3 mana, you should really consider your attacks very carefully. Also, love the art and really love the flavor text. Next is Knight of Dawn's Light, which is 1 and a white for a 2/2 with first strike. If you gain life, you gain that much life +1 instead, and it can pump for 1 and a white to get +1/+1 until end of turn. This is a 6. Almost bordering on a 7, because it's just so overtly powerful. First strike is a monstrous ability, and the fact that you can pump it means that it's extremely difficult to block. It's going to get in damage, it's going to defend you exceedingly well, and your opponent has to have something to find a way to break through. Otherwise, you're going to be holding back like 3/3s and even 4/4s pretty late into the game. And for that reason, I think it can kind of justify itself being like a 6.5 approaching on 7. Love Song of Night and Day. Ooh. 2 and a white for an enchantment saga with read ahead, which means it could start at 1, 2, or 3. Chapter 1 is interesting. You and target opponent each draw 2 cards. Since you played this enchantment, you're technically down a card, and your opponent is technically up a card. Chapter 2, create a 1/1 white bird creature token with flying. Chapter 3, put a 1/1 counter on each of up to 2 target creatures. Yeah, I don't know about this one. I think the first chapter is bad because you're just literally giving your opponent a card. I think the second chapter is okay, I guess, but still a little bit bad, especially since you have to wait until turn 4 at the earliest to put it out there. And then chapter 3 is just kind of abysmal. You're making your 1 turn delay 1/1 into possibly a 2/2. God forbid you don't have anything else out to play. I think this is a 3 or a 4. I don't think it's very good at all. Phyrexian Missionaries next, 1 and a white for a 2/3 lifelink. Oh wow. Is this a 7? For a kicker cost of 1 and a black, if it was kicked, you return target creature card from your graveyard to your hand. I think this might be a 7. Like, this is an above rate vanilla test card that in the late game has obscene value. For just an additional 2 mana, you just get any creature back from your graveyard. This has to be a 7. I'm going to first pick this card pretty often, I think, if I see it in the uncommon slot. And I'm going to be pretty happy with it. Like, a 2/3 with lifelink attacks into opponent's creatures exceedingly well during the opening stages of the game. It's really difficult to attack into. It holds back 2/2s basically forever, which means in a way it's kind of gaining life in the sense that you're not being attacked. And then it can trade for 3/2s just as well while also gaining you life. And then if you're ever in the late game, like what if you have 2 of these? Like you just loop them every turn? Like, Play one of these with kicker, get one back, block with it, gain 2 life, do it again the next turn just for 4 mana, while you're also drawing cards. Yeah, this is a 7. This is a 7 out of 10 card, and I think it might be the first 7 I've given so far in this video. Maybe even in the entire draft review. Interesting. Prayer of Binding is our next card, which is 3 and a white for a flash enchantment. When it enters the battlefield, exile up to 1 target non-land permanent an opponent controls until Prayer of Binding leaves the battlefield. You gain 2 life. The fact that this has flash makes it pretty solid. I think that makes it a 6. Even though it is an enchantment and it can be removed, I think the potential for blowouts with instant speed removal, especially like completely like no restrictions removal like this that can hit any permanent type basically. I think this is definitely above rate. I think this is a 6. Definitely good removal. Resolute Reinforcements is 1 and a white for a 1/1 with flash, and when it enters the battlefield, you create a 1/1 white soldier creature token. I really like this card. The fact that it just makes a token for you and it has flash means it combines with other things to do double blocks exceedingly well. It also is 2 different bodies for you to be able to sacrifice, and it still trades for a 2/2 and a 3/2. So it does all of your 2-drop stuff while also being spread across 2 bodies, and I think that's enough to make it a 5, because your average, well, maybe that's enough to make it a 4. If you have the synergy stuff, I think it's a 5. Otherwise, it's going to be a 4, because you'll end up with at least some amount of synergy stuff, and the raw stats are enough spread across 2 bodies. Runic Shot is a single white mana for destroy target tapped creature if it was kicked to scry 2, which is just blue mana. So this is a sorcery, which means it's not free. You do have to have your opponent beat down on you, or you have to tap things some other way. There are a lot of ways to have things tapped, especially in blue, which this card obviously wants to be. And you do generally want to cast it for the blue-white, because the scry 2 for only 1 extra mana doesn't make this card that much more expensive. Like 2 mana destroy a target tapped creature scry 2 is still definitely good. I think this card is going to be a 6 in some decks, and in other decks it's going to be a 5. Even in like the blue-white aggro decks that are trying to beat in, you're still going to end up with some stuff that ends up with your opponent's creatures being tapped, and you'll find places to use this. And then it'll still be probably a 5. Shalai's Acolyte is next. 4 and a white for a 3/4 flyer with kicker 1 and a green, and if it was kicked, it enters the battlefield with 2 1/1 counters. This card, I think, is bordering on a 6 maybe. That extra point of toughness and the kicker ability just put this card so far high above like most of the flying creatures we've seen in this format. We've seen a lot of 5 mana 3/3s, we've seen 4 mana 2/2s, just stuff that gets beat to hell by this. And God forbid you ever have 7 mana laying around, because then you just have a 5/6 flyer, just a giant fat body that's going to deliver to your opponent super duper hard. I think this does necessarily deserve a rating as a 6. Alright, last one, Wingmantle Chaplain. 3 and a white for a 0/3. Ooh, well that's certainly something. When it enters the battlefield, it is a defender, by the way. Create a 1/1 white bird creature token with flying for each creature with defender you control. Whenever another creature with defender enters the battlefield under your control, create a 1/1 white bird soldier creature token with flying. Now this is actually a really good payoff for the defender deck. Problem is, the defender deck is also 5 colors. Like, you can't just have like 2 of these in your deck and expect your deck to be good. You're going to need to have multiple uncommons that pay you off for your defender gameplay. and then a couple of the specific uncommons like this one that are good, as well as lands, as well as good removal. And all of those things are going to be at a premium for other players besides specifically these cards. So it's a very difficult deck to put together. In that deck, I think this is like a 7. This is the card that would make me want to get in that deck if I want to have fun with it. But I don't think the card's that good. I think the deck is bad, and I think that playing this card, a bad card that makes your other bad cards better, just like raises the floor. It doesn't really make the deck good, it just makes it less bad. That's sad to say, but I think that is in fact the case. Resolute Reinforcements we already did, and that's everything in white. We're going to go up and take a look at our lands. Now, MTG Goldfish's website is a little busted in the sense that if I select common, it only brings me this Crystal Grotto, which, by the way, we'll go over now. Crystal Grotto is bad. You should not play Crystal Grotto. It's not a good card. If you're really, really, really desperate, and you really need to have the mana fixing, I guess you can play it, but holy shit, you should be aiming higher, because you can get much better. But what we do have in this set is a cycle of tapped duels like this one, that all have 2 basic land types enter the battlefield tapped, and make your domain significantly better. Those are all good. These are all really good. I think you should pick them as 6s, especially once you've settled into a color combination. And I think the domain deck is good enough to where you're going to be wanting to pick these as 6s generally. You'll know if you're the only person at the table who's in this in these colors when these things come around, but you shouldn't always take these as signals, because if they don't come around, that doesn't mean someone's in that color combination. It just means that they wanted a land, and these are lands that everyone's going to want. Even if you're not playing blue or white, there's a chance you might just play this in your domain deck, just because you want to have a chance of reaching that critical mass of basic land types. And that's perfectly valid. Anyway, I'm pretty sure that's all of the lands. There's some rare lands, but we're not covering those yet. Spoiler alert, they're obviously good. But yeah, take these as 6s. Take them early, take them often, and you'll be able to splash really good cards and play really powerful stuff. So, moving into the archetypes, I'm going to move over to the multicolor uncommons, because there aren't actually any commons. I don't know why this is here, it's obviously not a common. I think black-white is among one of the most medium color combinations, alongside red-white. I think black-white and red-white are average. They have some good cards, and you can certainly build a great deck out of them, but I think they're on the low end. I think on the high end, you have blue-red as well as black-red that get a ton of support. Then you have the black-green as well as blue-green that I think also have a lot of really good support at common and uncommon. Just generally powerful cards. However, blue-white and white-green, I think, are below that by about 1 tier. Green-white has some interesting stuff, but ultimately, like, your goal is build a critical mass of like 1/1s and 2/2s and attack and maybe bump them. And that still leaves you open to being like attacked constantly. You're going to have to trade off your creatures. And the blue-white deck just seems like it's a little bit too cute. It's trying to do a lot of things all at once. Care about instants and sorceries, as well as your, your creatures gaining vigilance and +1/+1 and critical mass of them and stuff. Just, it's a little confused in the direction it's going. Green-red, I think, is probably the best aggro deck in the format. Big surprise there. I mean, it kind of makes sense. when you look at the green-red uncommons. The best deck, I think, is going to be blue-red. I think blue-red has enough high-value cards in it to where it's just going to be far and away the highest possible upside deck. I think I'm going to be looking to get into the blue-red deck very often. Like this card right here, I'm going to be first picking it, Najal. Najal is absolutely busted. Busted as hell if you ask me. The cards that are going to be the most consistent are probably going to be the ones in white-black and black-green and black-red. So like all of the black color combos, because you have access to really good removal and some a lot of recursion, specifically because of black, but also because of white. White surprisingly has some pretty good stuff there as well. A lot of expendable creatures. Red has your steal and sack strategy, as well as some pretty good ways to push through damage. And the green-black also has some pretty hefty creatures and things that heavily incentivize you to trade them off and pitch them into the yard to grab them up later. All in all, I'm really interested to play this format. I hope that you've enjoyed the draft videos that I've been putting out lately, although they're mostly centered around Vintage Cube right now. As soon as Dominaria United comes out, I will be drafting that. Whether or not that's going to be on Arena or MTGO is yet to be decided, because the pricing model of MTGO is obviously much more in line with what I'm interested in. But I've had a lot of fun. I hope you've had fun. Please consider leaving a comment, a like, or a subscription if you want more content like this in the future. Thank you for tuning in. You've been watching Robot Rallis, and happy drafting.